Every single year, Broncos country, Adam Schefter releases a list on ESPN's website of all the pre-trade deadline trade candidates gathered by all of the NFL executives. So we're talking about owners, GMs, coaches, scouts, etc. Everybody that they say is going to be active in being moved or moving before the NFL trade deadline. So, on today's Broncos Breakdown episode, we're going to talk about what Adam Schefter said about the Broncos trade candidates and players that the Denver Broncos could trade for. Now, before I get into that, I just have to ask you a very outwardly interesting, straight off the bat question. Should the Broncos make a trade in 2025? Meaning, could they give up a player? Should they trade for a player? You let me know in the comment section down below. Here's an interesting note, by the way. In this entire list of like 35, 36 players, Adam Schefter had 0 trade candidates listed for the Denver Broncos. Meaning, he said the Denver Broncos don't have anybody that they are willing to trade, at least at this point right now, which I kind of believe is kind of true. I know Sean Payton is one of those players, or one of those coaches that likes to, really invest in the team that he's got on the field. And he has said multiple times, this is one of the most talented teams that he's ever coached. So I agree with that. I don't think the Denver Broncos want to get rid of anyone at this point. However, as we saw with the Devon Vele trade, which we'll bring up later on in this episode, there is going to be, or there would have to be, a big package that you simply just can't ignore, aka a 4th-round pick for Devon Vele. Here's what Adam Schefter said about the trade candidates listed in his list. Just a couple of names, by the way, that are highlighted, bigger names, because there's a lot of smaller name guys as well. The list of trade candidates that executives and coaches believe could be available in the next couple of weeks feature multiple high-profile players, including Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson, Trey Hendrickson, Mark Andrews, Bradley Chubb, we know him very well, Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Breece Hall, Cameron Jordan, and Riq Woolen. These players' respective teams haven't necessarily made them available yet, but sources believe they eventually could be. Now, out of that list of all the players, and there's a couple more, like I said, who are the ones the Broncos could have potential interest in? Because like we said, the Broncos aren't interested in giving anybody away right now. So who could they get if they were to trade some draft capital? Well, in my opinion, there's only 3 names on the entirety of that list that are even worth mentioning. Mark Andrews, Chris Olave, and David Njoku, somebody that we've talked about multiple times on this channel already, so we're not going to deep dive into David Njoku. Instead, we're going to focus on Mark Andrews and Chris Olave. Let's start with the wide receiver. Chris Olave has had an up and down tenure in New Orleans, a place that Sean Payton is very familiar with. That's kind of why we've already started to bring up the Saints trade rumors yet again. But Chris Olave is an unbelievably talented wide receiver. So much so that when he came out of Ohio State, I was very high on him. And when he went to the Saints, I was like, okay, it should work. He's a good player. And like I said, at moments, Chris Olave looks outstanding. At other times, he looks like a non-factor, and you're just kind of getting everything in between. But with the upside that Chris Olave does give you, and with the statistics that he's already put up in 2025, I truly believe that if you were to trade for Chris Olave, the Sutton-Olave combo, that 1-2 punch, would feed families. It would be a perfect pairing. And producer Reed, if you want to bring up the wide receiver depth chart for the Denver Broncos here in just a second, I would go through and tell you why this would be so important for the Denver Broncos. There it is. Beautiful. Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin already is the big 3. We've talked, again, multiple times on this channel, that Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin, while we thought one of them was going to take that next step, right, that going to be that guy, that clear and obvious wide receiver 2, both of them kind of hover around that they'd be excellent 3s, right? They'd be excellent, some of the top-end 3s in the league. In fact, if Marvin Mims became a 3, he'd probably be the best one in the league, period, because he also does it on special teams. But let's go back to Courtland Sutton and Chris Olave for a second. Almost identical numbers, right? Like, Chris Olave's had more targets, but he's got, in my opinion, the worst quarterback in Spencer Rattler. He's got more receptions than Courtland Sutton. He's also got a worse run game. So they're throwing the ball a lot more, and they're always down. So they always have to climb back into the game. Cortland, though, has more touchdowns and a better average yards per reception. So Chris Olave seems to be more of that, like, where Cortland Sutton can go up and get those 50-50 balls. I don't think that's Chris Olave's game necessarily. I think he's more of like a possessions wide receiver, somebody that will average about 9 yards per reception, but still can get you 8 or 9 receptions a game. Here's another thing you need to know. The GM of the New Orleans Saints, Mickey Loomis, loves Sean Payton. Like, man crush, boy crush, whatever you want to call it. He loves Sean Payton, so much so that he was willing to give Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos a wonderful 4th-round pick, and it's actually supposed to be the other way. I didn't even realize that. The Broncos actually ended up getting the 2026 4th-round pick and the 2027 7th, whereas the Saints ended up getting Devon Vele. Producer Reed's on it. He's going to get on those 1s and 2s and fix that up for you. Oh, there it is. Almost. Quite not there yet. Boop, 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 boop. There it is. Beautiful. Sorry for my stutter step there, but that's my fault. I should have made the change there. The Broncos ended up getting a 2026 4th, 2027 7th, and Devon Vele went to the New Orleans Saints. So we know that Mickey Loomis is not a stranger to doing deals with his glorious ex-coach, Sean Payton. And I truly believe that with the skill set that Chris Olave has as that possessions wide receiver, Cortland Sutton then can focus more on the 50-50 balls. Cortland Sutton's a possessions wide receiver too, but he's more silky, sidelines, can go deep. He has bigger playmaking capabilities, in my opinion, than a guy like Chris Olave. But that's where Chris Olave could take that load off of Cortland Sutton and just be the, hey, 7 receptions, 55 yards, and a touchdown. So what would you give up to get Chris Olave? I've got my answer, and I'll tell you right after you're about to get hit with this YouTube ad break. But you let me know in the comment section down below what you would give up draft capital-wise to get Chris Olave. I'm giving up a 3rd rounder. And I talked to our Saints host, Trizzy Trace Gerard. Funny enough, another Trace host here at Chat Sports. Didn't know that was going to ever be a thing, but it definitely is. But like I said, I talked to Trace. He basically told me, look, based off of the history between Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton, if you gave us a 3rd, they'd send him off immediately. Maybe there's a conditional 6th or 7th and there's somewhere else, but for the most part, you're looking at a 3rd-round pick for the likes of Chris Olave, which I'd be totally fine giving up. That's just my opinion. You could take that for what you will. Get $50 when you play your first $5 lineup when it comes to our friends over at Prize Picks. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, where it is good to be right. Do not miss any of the excitement this football season on Prize Picks, where, like I said, it is good to be right. Did you know you can now follow other Prize Picks players directly on the app? Copy their lineups in just one click, whether it's a friend, a celebrity partner like producer Reed, or just someone whose picks you like. Hit the follow button and check out every lineup they create in the new feed tab over on Prize Picks. How do you play? You pick your lineup, the players, the stat projection, the more or the less, and you watch your money multiply. Up to 2,000 times your money this football season on Prize Picks. Like I said, just download the app today. Use code CLNS. To get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It is good to be right. All right, back half of the show. Let's talk about a option that I've seen a lot of Broncos fans recently get in the comment section and share their thoughts with me. Mark Andrews, tight end of the Baltimore Ravens. And if you would have asked me this last season, I would have said Mark Andrews was not on the table. There's no way. And probably right about a year ago. But then Mark Andrews drops that touchdown against the Bills in the end zone in the playoff game. They lose. And now Baltimore is in a really, really tough spot at 1-5 with the Lamar Jackson injuries, plus all the injuries they've had to the other parts of their team. And Mark Andrews, I'm not going to front with you. He's not the same player that he once was. Not 3 years ago, not 4 years ago, but he is still very much a reliable, safe, red zone threat in the NFL. And despite this, the Ravens are still in an awful position, worse than they've ever been in the Lamar Jackson era. 1-5 without Lamar for another 2 weeks. They got the bye week coming up this week, and then our Ravens host Joey Peterson told me that he most likely is going to be back for the Bears game, but it's still kind of like a 50-50 question mark. So, could the Ravens be in the market to dump off some assets, knowing how bad their season has started? And maybe if they lose another game and go 1-6, they just punt on the rest of the season. Because the Steelers, they're going to win that division. They're 5-1, right? Or 4-1. I think it's 5-1. I think it is 5-1. Either way, they've got one loss. I know that for a fact. So they're in firm command of that division. Now, you could always say the wild card, but then there's 3 teams in the AFC West right now that are all vying for that wild card. You see what I'm saying? Like, you've got one in the AFC West that's going to win it, but the other 2 are most likely going to make the playoffs. Broncos, Chargers, Chiefs are all going to make the playoffs. So, the Ravens don't really have a situation right now where they're going to be in the market for buying at the deadline, even though they already have a couple of times. Here's what Sporting News said about a Mark Andrews trade. Andrews would make sense as an addition to a contending team, the Denver Broncos, but he doesn't make a ton of sense for the Ravens to keep unless they quickly begin to turn things around. All signs indicate they're not. The Ravens also have Isaiah Likely as a younger but still solid tight end option. That leaves Andrews as the obvious sell candidate. If the Ravens can get a mid-round draft pick back for Andrews, it can help propel them into the future where there are guys that are healthier and the losses aren't as disappointing. AKA, Mark Andrews is most likely done as a Baltimore Raven. He is also, like I said, a major red zone threat. Could you imagine the scheme that you could put up? Mark Andrews, bigger body tight end, completely different than the likes of a guy like Evan Ingram, where Evan Ingram is more of the bigger body wide receiver, right? Plays as kind of like that slot tight end, just now starting to come onto the scene where he's really starting to make an impact for the Denver Broncos. But I also want to highlight that Bo Nix has not been great in the red zone this year, especially when it comes to his accuracy. It dips significantly when he gets into the opponent's 20-yard line and closer. Jared Goff, by the way, is number 1 in the NFL in red zone accuracy. 76.9%, so we'll round up. We'll say 77. And we'll round down for Bo Nix because he's at 0.1. So essentially you're looking at a 14% swing from Jared Goff to Bo Nix. And Bo Nix isn't even last. He's bottom 20, but he's not last. So if you were to get a core that kind of resembles, maybe not in talent, but is kind of like Detroit Lions light of Jahmyr Gibbs, J.K. Dobbins, or R.J. Harvey, Sam Laporta, your Mark Andrews, Amon-Ra St. Brown, your Cortland Sutton. And again, this is not a play style similarity. This is just like the big four, the big core 4. And Jamison Williams, which could be either your Troy Franklin or your Marvin Mims. Do you see where I'm going with this? Adding a second weapon might be the solution for the Denver Broncos to really propel them forward and have that icing on the cake. And what would you give up? How about a 4th-round pick? The 4th rounder that you got from the Saints. Just makes too much sense. So, if you had to pick a player, Mark Andrews, type your M's. If you want Chris Olave instead, type your C's. And remember, to get videos just like this every single day, you got to hit that sub button. And if you made it to the very end, do me a quick little favor. Type your me in the comment section down below. It just kind of helps me see who the real ones are. That's going to do it for us on our last episode today of Broncos Breakdown. A mile high salute to you. Be cool.